Okay, let's begin with a word of prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we are so thankful that once again we can come before you to open your word, to see the light that you've given us for this time, and help us to understand the things that we study, and that you can be with each person who is searching for truth. We know, Lord, that there are many who are looking for truth and understanding, and we pray that you can give them wisdom, that your Holy Spirit that inspired the Bible can also inspire us as we study it. Continue to bless each person in their personal lives and our influence upon others. We ask, Lord, that we can reveal your character. Be with us now through thy Spirit, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, good morning, everyone. So the confusing study yesterday, I'm just going to kind of review it, sort of a cursory review, in that we were looking at Cyrus's decree. That's where we started. We started in Ezra chapter 1, and then we backtracked a little bit to 2 Chronicles 36. And we came to look at that 49 years, which you can see on here, from 586 to 537. So that's the 49 years, which is a Jubilee cycle. And the suggestion that I had is that this cycle is intentionally there, because this is dealing with the prophecy of Leviticus 26, that is dealing with the 7 times, that is based on Leviticus 25 being a sabbatical and a Jubilee cycle. We also have the periods of 21 years. And the significance to us at this time is the 21 days from December 4th to December 25th, which we get from as a symbol from Daniel chapter 10, where Daniel prays for 3 full weeks. And so the significance of these 3 weeks, of course, is 777, which is a symbol that we use going from November 9th to December 25th. So November 9th, 2019 to December 25th, 2021. Now that number, as you see on this chart here, this chart I did in 2014. So I'd already had my eye on the triple sevens, and I did a study on the 2 Lamechs. So you have the one Lamech who has the 7 times curse of his ancestor Cain, where he has it 70 times 7, and then the other Lamech who lived 777 years. And so I tie them together in the 70 weeks in these symbols. And I know that Chris had written me an email asking me about this. And specifically, Chris, what was your question about this 7 times 7 times 7? Do you remember?
I believe it had to do with, this technique of combining these 7s in the way you did.
Okay. And I think part of it, so if I remember correctly, when I was doing this back in 2014, I had noticed that prophetic periods had a period at the beginning and a period at the end. So for instance, the 2300 days has a period of 49 years at the beginning, from 457 to 408. That's that 49 years, that 7 times 7, or 7 weeks. And when you get to the end of the 2300 days, you have the 46 years from 1798 to 1844, correct?
Yes.
Now, if you look at this, if you take 2300 days, it is 40, it's 50 periods of 46 years. That is 46 times 50 is 2300.
Okay.
And that's a Jubilee cycle, right? 50. So if you go from 457 to 1798, it's 49 times 46. And that means the 50th period of 46 years is from 1798 to 1844. Does that make sense? Or do I need to draw it?
That makes sense.
Okay. Well, for you, Jeff. Chris, did that make sense to you?
I believe it does. It'd be
Okay.
probably better if you could sketch it anyway. I think I grasp it.
Okay. So I'll just draw it because there may be people who, the visual thing would help a little bit. Yeah. And I ended up. So this would be this period of time here is 49 times 46 years. So this is the 50th. So that's a Jubilee cycle of 46 years. That is, I can look at the beginning period and the ending period and see that they have a relationship. So when I was looking at the 70 weeks itself, I guess I can just put it here. The week of Christ. So you have the 7 years, and we had this 434 years here. So this is 34 AD, 27. Then I recognized if I multiplied 49 by 7, so in a sense, just like I took 49 times 46, it represented this period of time from here to here, right? So if I multiplied 49 times 7, it just gave me this number, which I added to the center period. So that means all I'm saying is that there's a relationship between the two periods at the end of a prophetic period and the prophetic period itself in some way or other. It's not always exactly the same, but I could find this with all of these different periods. The other one that I had seen was the 2,604 years of the prophetic mirror, which starts in 742 and ends in 1863. So when we had looked at this period, remember we had 19 years, 46 years, and then 46 years and 19 years. And then we'd have these two 25/20s, one going here, and whoops, that one's going here, and this one's going here, right? And so you have got 65 years here at the end, 65 years over here, right? So there's our two 25/20s and the prophetic mirror. And I noticed some different things. One is the relationship between the prophetic mirror and the 70-week prophecy is how many times does this go into this? How many times does 434 go into 2,604? What's 2,604 divided by 434? Somebody with the
6.
6, right? So the relationship between this entire period and this period is also six times, right? So this would be, if this is 62 weeks, how many weeks is 2,604?
I got like 372.
Yeah, so 372 weeks, something like that, right? So the point is that there's this ratio or relationship between this and this. Now, the 65 years itself, I never used to like that because I thought it should be 70 years. 65 years didn't make much sense. But 2,604 is, so you got 2,604 minus 2,520. The difference is 84 years, right? And 84 is 7 times 12, which is on the 1843 chart, if you can see it up here. We have the 7 times 12 is 84 times 30. So then I understood that I could take this 7 times 12 equals 84 times 30 equals 2520. But I could then go 7 times 12 equals 84 times 31 equals 2,604 years of the prophetic mirror, and 31 is the crucifixion date here in the week of Christ, right? So you got the cross here in 31 AD. So all of these things are tied together. I mean, I did a lot more work on this and showing this. But the point is, I can divide this week by 31, and 62 weeks I can divide by 31, right? Because 31, this is double of that.
Yeah, evenly.
Yeah. So there's just all of these relationships of these structures. So when I took these two at the end, the beginning and the end, and I multiplied them, and I could create that 777 by adding 434 and 343. This was similar to what Stephen had done, where he had noticed the 777 days from November 9th to December 25th, that it was divided by 252 and 525. So we have these different iterations. You can have 252 plus 525. You can have 434 plus 343. And you can also have 161 by 616 plus 616. All of those equal 777. And we have all of them represented in our 777 days. The 161 days, this was from that presentation that Dwight did, dealing with 160 days. So that goes to December 25th. So that was 616 days from November 9th. This one here, what's that?
Or is that 343, not 341?
Yeah, 343. Yeah. Okay, sorry. Yeah, so 343. Does anybody remember where the 434 days lined up? What's 343 days before December 25th, 2021? So
43 days or 400.
343 days before here. January
16th.
And that was the end of 10 days of prayer that began on January 6th, right? And this was connected to that 100 days of prayer that ended on July, right? So there was 187 days to January 6th. And then there was the 100 days of prayer that ended on July 4th and began on March 27th, right? So this structure here, now January 16th, it's also a symbol. So if I go January 16th, this is the 16th day of the first month as a symbol, 161.
Theodore,
Yeah.
the whiteboard, we're only seeing 2/3 of it.
Oh, okay. How's that? There we go.
That's perfect.
Better.
Yeah, so the thing is, these numbers here, this 252 and 525, 434 and 343, 161 and 616, these dates, and I can't remember what the date was that Dwight presented, but it's 161 days before December 25th, and he was using the symbol of 160 days, which would be the next day. So he was talking about the next day, but it was 161 days from when he was presenting. And that was this topic that was having to do, Dwight's not here yet, is he?
It's the 17th of July.
Yeah, it was the 17th of July, right? So he was looking at July 18th, but we were looking at the 17th of July when he was presenting about July 18th, 2021.
Correct.
Yeah, okay. And you were getting the 160 days from, do you remember?
Well,
It had
as
to
I
be Jonah or something, didn't it?
we were into Jonah, but I thought that had something to do at that point also with Ezra 10.
Oh, right. It had to do with Ezra 10. Okay. I can't remember specifically what.
Because we were going to be coming to the
20th day
What
of
was
the
it?
ninth month.
right.
Mhm. But I just don't remember why you chose the number 160. Why, or you were just looking at from July 18th.
Correct.
Okay, and something to do with the number 40, I remember as well. If I remember, I don't remember.
Okay. It is a little bit back there for all of us.
Yeah, I mean, 140 goes into 64 times. So it might have had something to do with that, the 40 days, and then that's 4 times 40 days. But anyway, we had seen this relationship, and the point is, all of this was the basis for this happened back in 2014 by looking at these prophetic periods. So that was a period of about a month where all I was doing is writing on whiteboards and trying to sort this stuff out. So I sorted that out, and then I presented that in 2014 in October 20th and 21st in Arkansas. So it was kind of obscure. Most people didn't know what I was talking about. But this idea that I could take these then, and this, of course, 49 is 7 times 7. So that it produced that 777 then became this understanding of numbers that we then continued to apply in our analysis of the times that were existing in our line, because I first applied them to an analysis of the prophetic periods in the past. So there was no way I was trying to predict something in the future, but by understanding the past, we can understand the present. And so God used these patterns that existed in the prophetic periods, first to confirm that the prophetic periods had design, but then when we saw that that same design existed in our line, that was a witness that our line was from God. And some people rejected not just the witness of our lines, but they also rejected the witness of the prophetic periods in the past. So that was part of the problem. And that's why in studying the 2520 here, we have to decide whether this, and I'm trying to figure out what was the 434. I'm sorry, Rad, because I read your note there. 434 was 1017.
Because you had asked what was 434 from the end of the 777, I think.
Oh, backwards. So you're going back. 434 to December 25th.
December 25th minus 434,
Yeah.
I think it goes to October 17th,
Okay.
which was the presentation that Daniel made.
Yeah, the first one he did. October 17th, because then he did the other one on December 5th, right?
I think so.
Yeah, that's the one that where he got cut off was December 5th. So this was his first one that he had done, which they didn't cut him off because they didn't really understand where he was going. That's what I remember. Anyway, if that's correct, if that's the one I'm thinking of, because he had done 2 presentations. If this is the School of the Prophets, or FFA presentation you're talking about, October 17th. Okay. Anyway, so going back to where I was. So in studying the 2520, what we're doing is we're going back and we're looking at the past again, because we need light for our feet at the present time. So God directed us to go back and re-examine the 2520. And other people who rejected July 18th have rejected all of the symbolic use of numbers. And whether they have openly yet rejected the 2520, their basis for believing the 2520 would no longer exist. That is, all you could say, because if all this is just coincidence, then you would just say the 2520 was coincidence. That would be the argument that you would make. So that's the problem here. Either God was leading us and the analysis of the prophetic periods in the past is correct, or God isn't leading us and the analysis of prophetic periods in the past is just some kind of coincidence. And if that's the case, I don't see any reason for anyone to be a Seventh-day Adventist. Because when we look at something like what we have here, the 490 years, this is based upon simply, if we believed the 2520, then these are the dates that would be produced. That is, we would have 677 to 607. That would be the 70 years from Manasseh's captivity to Daniel's captivity. And we would have these different periods of 70 years. And the decrees, the 3 decrees, would be connected to the end of each of these prophetic periods. Of course, Manasseh's doesn't have a decree, but it's added to Daniel's 70 years, which is the Babylonian captivity. And that's going to end when Cyrus comes to the throne in the fall of 537, which is connected to his decree 6 months later. So that period is a period of 140 years that ends with a decree. And then we have Darius's decree, and it ends a period of 70 years for the temple. That is, the temple lays in ruins for 70 years. So Darius's decree, 7 months later, or 6 months later, something like that, you're going to have the dedication of the temple. So it's not dedicated in the same year as the decree on our calendar, but it is in the same year as the biblical calendar, because it's on the 3rd day of the 12th month in 515 BC, which on our date is the 3rd month, 12th day, March 12th, 515. but it's still part of that Jewish year, spring to spring, 516 BC. So that 70 years is 70 years and 7 months that the temple lay in ruins. And then we have Artaxerxes' decree. And it's not shown here because I didn't put this on this one because I was focusing on the periods of 490 years, but that ends 140 years from Jehoiachin's captivity. So we had looked at that. Jehoiachin has 4 periods attached to his captivity: the 36 years that he's captive, the 666 years from his captivity to the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, and the 140 years from his captivity until 457. So all of these structures are extremely unlikely. The 490 years for the temple and the 70 years tying together. But this is all if we have the 490 years kingship that marks the 490 years of transgression of the sabbatical cycle that leads to the 70 years Babylonian captivity. So these things are all interconnected. But this structure we have here of the 490s is just part of a larger structure. And so this structure becomes extremely complex. Even that date, 1097, it's from 1097 to 1844. Does anybody know how many years that is and what it can be divided by? So if you added 1843 to 1097, you'd have how many years? That's the easy way to do it.
$2,940.
Okay, so 1097 plus 1843 and 2,940, what number could we divide that by? What if we divided it by a Jubilee cycle? How many Jubilee cycles would that be?
60.
Yeah, so you'd have 60 Jubilee cycles. Now, if we go from, well, I'll leave that part out. So if we have 60 Jubilee cycles, is that significant as a number?
Well, it could be.
Okay, now it is. Now, the other way we could look at it, if we go back to the beginning of the world and we take that same number of years, so I go to 1097 BC and I add 2,940 years, I come back to 4037 BC, and that's going to be the 8th year after the creation of the world. Depends how you count it, but.
Yeah, do it again.
So I'm just going back from 1097 BC. I'm going to go 60 times 49 years, so 2,940 years prior to there being a king. So we know that the creation of the world, the first full year of creation is 4045 BC. And so this is 8 years after the creation of the world. And it is possible. Now, if we take this number, then if we go from 4037, here, I'll show you on my calculator. This way people can see it. Now, 4037 is 8 years after the creation of the world. So it is possible that this is the year of the origin of sin. We don't know when Adam and Eve first sinned. But let's say they spent 7 full years in paradise without sin. It is possible that sin could have begun in 737 BC. And this would be, the first time prophecy is 120 years. And if you add 4037 plus 1843, you get this number, 5888. And this is divided by 49 is 120. So this was what I presented back in 2014. One of the things I presented in trying to figure out the chronology of the world. And back then, I was actually putting the creation of the world in 4037 because I hadn't worked out everything yet when it came to the earlier chronology. So I had a bit shorter chronology. But one of the things we could see is that 120 years times 49 could possibly be the number of years from the origin of sin to 1844. And that would mean we're in the Jubilee of the final 120 years of Earth's history, but that period is lengthened. That is, from 1844, we have a symbolic 120 years, but that is not a literal 120 years. That is, we don't know when Jesus comes back after 1844. That is, from 1844, there's time no longer in relationship to knowing the date for the second coming of Christ. So that was the ideas that I had back in 2014. So we're looking at all this in that this all results from an understanding of the 2520 by analyzing these prophetic periods and analyzing history with these chronological structures. This is why we could then analyze our own history and find that these structures exist within our movement. And so it wasn't something we were looking for. It's just something that happened. People noticed that there was structure. Now, in order to understand that structure, we needed to understand the structures of the prophetic periods in the past. That is, we weren't creating something new. All of these tools were given to us, and we just came upon them and understanding our dates. So that's one of the things that we have to resolve in our minds. Do we accept what we see here in front of us as reality and not something that's manufactured by man? And if that's the case, if we can see that this is God's fingerprint, then do we also recognize that it's the same fingerprint in our movement? So each of us have to make that decision. And that's why, we're studying what we're studying. Now, the study today, which it was supposed to be yesterday as well, is looking at Ezra and the decrees. So we're going to go there. And I thank Chris for that question that he emailed me. I just didn't have time to respond fully in an email. So when we go to the story of Ezra, we know that this Cyrus comes to the throne. Now it's going to be in the first year of Cyrus, the king of Persia. Now in Daniel chapter 10, this is called the third year of Cyrus. That is, you could count Cyrus's reigns 3 different ways. You could count his reign from the time that he's actually the king of Persia, which is, I can't remember how many years, I should remember it, but it's at least 9 years, I think it's longer, that he's the king of Persia. And his uncle is the king of Media. And when he comes against Babylon on October 13th, 539, and kills Belshazzar, his army does. He's the general. This is going to be 2 years before the death of his uncle. Once his uncle dies, Cyrus now becomes the king of Media and Persia. So when it says the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, in this context, this is referring to the first year, and that first year would begin in the spring of 536. That is, even though he comes to the throne, you're going to count his reign in the spring. But he's already been the king of Persia for a long time. And he's been the king of lands since the fall of Babylon. So there are different titles that he has and different territories that he's king over. But in Ezra chapter 1, it's going to refer to 536, technically, the spring of 536, as the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia. But in Daniel chapter 10, it's going to call it the third year of Cyrus. Now, there's actually Brittany, after the division that happened with the Omega and us, she started to attack this idea that Daniel chapter 10 is in the first year of Cyrus. She tried to argue that the third year of Cyrus is what's being talked about in Daniel chapter 10, and that it's not talking about the decree that he issues, that the battle that's going on with Michael and Satan over the mind of Cyrus has nothing to do with the issuing of the decree. And she tried to use some spirit of prophecy statements to do that, but was reading into them some things that Ellen White wasn't saying. So I tried to point it out to her. And I think this was slightly just before the division happened. After the division, she then started presenting this openly, why our movement was wrong. And one of her main arguments had to do with this interpretation that Daniel chapter 10 being the third year of Cyrus as being also the first year of Cyrus. So it is a kind of a contentious issue in that sense, but she's the only one I know that made an issue of it. But we know here that the first year of Cyrus is definitely the spring of 536. And so Cyrus is going to issue this decree, and they're going to return to Jerusalem. I'm going to just get rid of the Hebrew numbers here. So now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom and put it also in writing, saying. So when we see that the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, can we match this to Daniel chapter 10, when Daniel's praying for 3 full weeks and there's this battle going on, right? And he says, in the 24th day of the first month, I was by the side of the great river, which is Hiddekel. And he's going to have this vision. And it says, but the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days. But lo, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, and I remained there with the kings of Persia. Now I'm come to make thee understand what shall befall in thy people in the latter days. So we take this, Daniel chapter 10, as being this issue where this battle between Christ and Satan, the prince of the kingdom of Persia being, in my understanding, Satan, because this is Satan against Michael, who's Christ, and the kings of Persia, referring to the kings of Persia, in this case, Cyrus. So this is a battle that's going on. But it says at the beginning, in the third year of Cyrus, king of Persia. So the question is this third year also the first year? And we know that you can count it both ways. So we have this decree issued. And if it's issued on the 24th day of the first month or shortly thereafter, people are then going to be leaving Babylon and going to Jerusalem. And how long does it take to go from Babylon to Jerusalem?
About 4 months.
Yeah, so 4 months, maybe slightly less, maybe slightly more, depending on where you're leaving from Babylon. We know that they left from the river Ahava on the 12th day of the first month, and arrived on the first day of the 5th month. And so that's a period of about 3 months and 20 days, roughly. So it takes about that long. So if Cyrus issues a decree in the spring, and then this is like April 24th, so the first day of the first month lines up, I think, with the 1st of April or something like that. They would take some time, so people might leave maybe in the 2nd month, and sometime in the 2nd month, and they would get to Jerusalem maybe in the 6th month. Now, when they get there, and there's all this, his decree, and it talks about these people that are going to leave, and names all of them in chapter 2, and then in chapter 3, and in the 7th, when the 7th month was come, and the children of Israel were in the cities, the people gathered themselves together as one man in Jerusalem. And so on the first day of the 7th month, they're going to set up this altar. So if they left in the spring, they definitely can be in Jerusalem to set up an altar on the first day of the 7th month. So this fits with the chronology of when the decree is issued. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So we don't think that Cyrus could have issued the decree, in 537, because he doesn't become king until the fall of 537. And so this decree would be issued in the spring, and they're going to be there in the fall of 536, setting up this altar. In verse 6, it says, from the first day of the 7th month, they began to offer burnt offerings unto the Lord, but the foundation of the temple of the Lord was not yet laid. And we know that they're going to lay the temple foundation in the 2nd month, on the 2nd day of the 2nd month, that they're going to be rebuilding the temple, right? On the 2nd year of their coming to the house of God at Jerusalem, in the 2nd month. I'm not sure, is this on the 2nd day? Anyway, it's the 2nd month, in the 2nd year, began Zerubbabel the son of Shealtiel and Jeshua the son of Jozadak, and the remnant of their brethren, the priests and the Levites, and all that were come out of the captivity unto Jerusalem, and appointed the Levites from 20 years old and upward to set forward the work of the house of the Lord. Then stood Jeshua and his sons and his brethren, right? And they're going to lay down the foundation of the temple. And that's chapter 3. And then you're going to have the adversaries oppose the rebuilding. And these adversaries, in this case, so these people are Samaritans, right? It says, then they came to Zerubbabel and to the chief of the fathers and said unto them, let us build with you, for we seek your God as ye do, and we do sacrifice unto him since the days of Esarhaddon, king of Assyria, or Asher, which broughteth us up hither. So Esarhaddon, in the same year that he had taken Manasseh captive, he had also repopulated northern Israel, right? So Esarhaddon was involved because northern Israel had been northern Israel had been brought into captivity. And so one of the things he did is he brought people from different nations that he had made captive and placed them in northern Israel. And these later became what we call the Samaritans. This was Esarhaddon, so he's the same one who took Manasseh captive. So these people want to participate. Now, why wouldn't they let them participate?
It was not their task to
Right.
to rebuild the temple that
Right.
had been issued to the
Right.
Jews.
And they don't want to be associated with these nations, right? Now, there is another thing we learned when we studied Ezekiel, is that the southern kingdom of Judah would have seen those in the northern kingdom as being in apostasy. So now some of the northern kingdom would have bred with some of the people that were brought there. So you have this sort of mixed multitude, I guess you might say, in northern Israel. And they don't participate in the building of the temple. "You have nothing to do with us to build an house unto our God, but we ourselves together will build unto the Lord God of Israel, as King Cyrus, the king of Persia, hath commanded us." Then the people of the land weakened the hands of the people of Judah and troubled them in building, and hired counselors against them to frustrate their purpose all the days of Cyrus, king of Persia, even unto the reign of Darius, king of Persia. So Darius, king of Persia, that's going to be the one who issues the second decree. So the building of the temple is going to be hindered in this period of time. And we have Cyrus, and we have Cambyses and false Smyrtus. Under those periods of time, we're going to have these issues. Now it says in Ezra 4:6, "In the reign of Ahasuerus, in the beginning of his reign, they wrote they unto him an accusation against the inhabitants of Judah and Jerusalem. And in the days of Artaxerxes wrote Bishlam, Mithridath, Tabeel, and the rest of their companions unto Artaxerxes, king of Persia. And the writing of the letter was written in the Syrian tongue and interpreted in the Syrian tongue." So what's going to happen here? Who is Ahasuerus and who is Artaxerxes?
I know that Artaxerxes is false Smyrtus.
Yeah. And Ahasuerus?
Is that Cambyses?
Yeah, Cambyses, right? So Ellen White plainly tells us this. This is, let me see if I can find it. Yeah, so this is in Prophets and Kings. She says, "During the reign of Cambyses, the work of the temple progressed slowly, and during the reign of false Smyrtus, called Artaxerxes in Ezra 4:7, the Samaritans induced the unscrupulous impostor to issue a decree forbidding the Jews to rebuild their temple and city." So what's going to happen is there's going to be these appeals made from these counselors who are trying to frustrate this. And they do this in the reign of Cyrus, also Cambyses. So Cambyses being called Ahasuerus, this confuses some people. That is, there are many people I've run into who take this as reading. They hired counselors all the days of Cyrus, king of Persia, and to Darius. And then Ahasuerus, they look at as Xerxes. And then Artaxerxes, they take as Artaxerxes Longimanus, right? So they have a completely different chronology when they do this. So they're going to put this in the time of Artaxerxes, the one who actually issues the third decree. But Ellen White's clear that Ahasuerus then would be Cambyses, and Artaxerxes here is a reference to false Smyrtus. Now, why is the Bible using these names, Ahasuerus and Artaxerxes? Because they use Ahasuerus also for Xerxes.
They're just titles.
They're titles, right? So people think that these are the names of these kings, but these kings would have different names. And even when you look at something like Darius the Mede, and then you have Darius the Persian, some people don't believe that Darius the Mede actually existed. He has another name. It's, I can't pronounce it. At least I can't think. If I look at it, I can pronounce it. I can never pronounce it unless I'm reading it. Cyanxerxes or something like that. But anyway, he has different names. These people have different names. So here the Bible is using the names that the Jews would have used in naming these kings. So they would have used different names. They would have used the titles, but sometimes in history these names are used differently. So, because even Cyrus, that's Koresh, right? That's just Greek. So we're going to have this hindrance that happens, and this one that happens under false Smyrtus, which is Artaxerxes. This one's interesting because he's going to look at the records, and he's going to find that that the Jews are troublesome. And what records would he have looked at? So, okay, it says in verse 15, that search may be made in the book of records of thy fathers, so shalt thou find in the book of the records, and know that this city is a rebellious city, and hurtful unto the kings of the provinces, and that they have moved sedition within the same of old time, for which cause was this city destroyed. We certify the king that if this city be builded again, and the walls thereof set up, by this means thou shalt have no portion on this side of the river. And then sent the king to answer unto Rehum the chancellor, and unto Shimshai the scribe, and to the rest of their companions that dwell in Samaria, and unto the rest beyond the river, peace and at such a time. The letter which ye sent unto us hath been plainly read before me, and I commanded, and search hath been made, and it is found that this city of old time hath made insurrection against kings, and that rebellion and sedition have been made therein. There may have been mighty kings also over Jerusalem, which have ruled over all countries beyond the river, and toll and tribute and custom was paid unto them. Give ye now commandment to cause these men to cease, and that this city be not builded, until another commandment shall be given from me. So this is false Smyrtus, and he's the one who brings an end to the construction. Now, what records would he have looked at that would have told him this?
Probably the Babylonian records.
Yeah, so the Babylonian Chronicles. So he would have looked at this record of these battles against Jerusalem. And so that would be his basis. Now, later on, under Darius, you're going to have a search being made again, and that's in Ezra chapter 5. So in Ezra chapter 5, we're going to have now the things that lead to the second decree. Then the prophets Haggai the prophet and Zechariah the son of Iddo prophesied unto the Jews that were in Judah and Jerusalem in the name of the God of Israel, even unto them. Now this is going to begin in the second year of Darius, that they begin to prophesy. And we can see that when we read Haggai and Zechariah. So if you go to Haggai chapter 1, it says, in the second year of Darius the king, in the 6th month, in the first day of the month. So he's going to have a vision given to him in the second year. And we see also with Zechariah, it says, in the 8th month, in the second year of Darius, came the word of the Lord unto Zechariah, the son of Berechiah. So both of these are going to be given visions in the second year of Darius. And that's going to commence the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem. So that's what Ezra is referring to here. Now, most people, anyone that I have ever read that talks about Darius's decree is going to place it in the second year of Darius, except Ellen White. So I've so far not found anyone who places it in the 6th year of Darius, but that's where Ellen White places it. She places the second decree as less or as more than 20 years from Cyrus's decree, and as less than 20 years from when the the captives returned to Jerusalem. So that's going to place it in the summer of 516 BC, because it's going to be more than 20 years from Cyrus's decree and less than 20 years from when the exiles return. So that becomes quite interesting. But here we're going to see that in the second year that the building begins again. And now you're going to have people who are going to try to stop it. So this Tatnai governor on this side of the river, and Shetha-boznai and their companions, and said thus unto them, who hath commanded you to build this house and make up this wall? Then said we unto them after this manner, what are the names of the men that make this building? But the eye of God was upon the elders of the Jews, that they could not cause them to cease till the matter came to Darius. And then they returned answer by letter concerning this matter. Now, this time, when a search is made, it's not going to be the chronicles of the kings of Babylon that they're going to look at. They're going to look at the records that exist in Persia. That is, they're going to find Artaxerxes' decree. And when they ask about this, they talk about Babel, that it was destroyed. But in the first year of Cyrus, it says in verse 13, the king of Babylon, the same king Cyrus, made a decree to build this house of God, and the vessels also of gold and silver of the house of God, which Nebuchadnezzar took out of the temple. So in this request that it says here, they sent a letter unto him wherein was thus written. So this is the governor. He's going to send this. So anyway, they're going to mention all this and that there was this decree issued. So it says, and now therefore, if it seem good to the king, let there be a search made in the king's treasure house, which is there at Babylon, whether it be so, that a decree was made of Cyrus the king to build the house of God at Jerusalem. And let the king send his pleasure to us concerning this matter. So in this case, they're going to be looking for the actual decree. So Cyrus makes a decree. A search was made in the house of the rolls, where the treasures were laid up in Babylon. And there was found that Achmetha, in the palace that is in the province of the Medes, a roll, and therein was a record thus written. So they continue looking until they find this. So they don't find it in the city of Babylon. It's not the Babylonian Chronicles. And they already know that Jerusalem was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar. So, and it shows the decree that in the first year of Cyrus the king, the same Cyrus the king made a decree concerning the house of God at Jerusalem. Let the house be builded, the place where they offered sacrifices, and let the foundations thereof be strongly laid, the height thereof 80 cubits, and the breadth thereof 20 cubits. So they have this. So now he's going to make a decree. So he says, moreover, I make a decree, what ye shall do to the elders of these Jews for the building of this house of God, that of the king's goods, even unto the tribute beyond the river, forthwith expenses be given unto these men, that they be not hindered. So he's going to make a decree. And the way that people just interpret this is they say, well, this begins in the second year. Now it's going to be late in the second year that Zechariah, it's the 8th month, 6 months, that Haggai begins prophesying. So halfway, I guess, through the year, which would be in the fall of 520 BC. And then they're going to commence building. So exactly when they commence building, it doesn't say whether they're going to start building right when that prophesying begins, and how long it takes till the enemies of the Jews then object, and how long it would then take for the letter to be sent to Darius, and then how long would it take for this search to be made, and then how long would it take for the decree then to be issued and then to be delivered. So what we can say is that Ellen White makes it clear that it's more than 20 years between the two decrees. And any sort of chronologist looking at that would just say she doesn't know anything about chronology. But I'd come to the same conclusion myself before I read it in the spirit of prophecy, based upon the prophecies themselves, and that the issuing of the decree is connected with the end of the 70 years for the temple. So the fact that she gives us that information is, I think, extremely important. For me, it was a confirmation of the work that I had done. And what we then have is we have each of these decrees all are involved in ending or connected to the end of the prophetic periods of 70 years and 220 years, even if you count from 677 to 457, and 140 years. So these periods of time are attached, the ending of them are attached to the decree, and the beginning of them are the 4 times. So I'll just show this in a diagram. See if that. Okay. Actually, I did give you some notes. I probably should just use the diagrams in my notes. Okay, let's go here. In the notes, I'd given you the chronology of the Babylonian captivity. I also have one which is just the diagrams that I use in that paper. So I'm going to open that up. This way it's easy to see. Okay. So I have all these different diagrams. There's the diagram dealing with Jehoiachin's 2 anointings, prophecy of Isaiah 7, 8, and 9, the 140 years, the 666 years, and the 36-year periods, 490 years. Here, this is marking the third year of Jehoiakim's third year, where Daniel is taken captive. The first Hebrew captives are carried away. You can see that would be in 607. And then this is just period of the kings. There's the temple. There's the 220 years. Okay. So the fulfillments of 70 years for Judah. So we can see Manasseh's captivity. I did this in color so to kind of make it clearer. But you can see there's 2 periods of 140 years. The first 2 7 times make up a period of 140 years. Manasseh's captivities to Daniel captivity is 70 years, and to Cyrus's, I put Cyrus's decree, but it's when Cyrus comes to the throne, 537. Ellen White says it's his accession to the throne within 2 years of the death of Darius the Mede that the 70 years are completed. And you can see the 21 years on either side of the 49 years. You can see Jehoiachin's captivity to the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem. You can see 586 is the destruction of the temple, and Darius's decree is addressing the completion of the temple after it was destroyed. So it's rebuilding. And you can see from if we have Cyrus's decree in the spring, and Ellen White says it's more than 20 years from Cyrus's decree, then 516, it would have to be sometime after the spring of 516, but less than 20 years from when they arrived. So they're going to arrive in 536 in the late summer, and so that would put the decree in 516. You couldn't put it in 515. But the temple would be dedicated in the spring, in March. So this structure of the 4-7 times, what is its significance as it relates to our time? What is it we're looking at? Are we looking at the thing that leads to the start of the 2300 days and the 70 weeks?
Yes.
Yeah. So for a Seventh-day Adventist who can see quite clearly that these 3 decrees that all are needed to start the 2300 days and the 70 weeks, that they're also connected to Leviticus 26. And so what's the significance of connecting this period of time to the 2300 days and the 70 weeks? I mean, there's some obvious things about it. I mean, we can say that this is a very strong argument for the 2300 days and the 70 weeks. That they begin in 457. Because, yeah, Chris, you have a comment?
Certainly they point us to that.
Yeah, and it seems odd to me that a Seventh-day Adventist would look at this, who believes the 2300 days, and just say, well, this is a bunch of nonsense. But I've had Adventists do that. I've also had others who are saying, well, why are people opposed to the 2520? They said this makes perfect sense. And we can see that this 220 years is attached to the 2300 days by the 3 decrees that end this period of time and that also commence the 2300 days. That is, these 3 decrees stitched together the literal fulfillment of Leviticus 26 for literal Israel. They stitch it to the 2300 days. Now, I wrote a paper dealing with why there's not a 2520 period of punishment for literal Israel found in Leviticus 26. And what I was trying to argue and what I was trying to show is that even if we don't take the 2520, like we don't take the 7 times and say it has anything to do with 2520, there is a de facto 2520 period that occurs by this fulfillment of Leviticus 26, in that it starts the 2300 days. And that it would be kind of foolish to say, well, the 2520 years itself, the fact that it is 7 times 360 is insignificant. I mean, that would be a foolish argument to make. You would have to say, at least from an analytical point of view, this is a confirmation of what Adventists already understand. And the Millerites had no conception of this when they understood Leviticus 26. In a sense, they just sidestepped all of this and just went from 677 to 1844. But there was nothing wrong with that. For Miller to do that wasn't wrong, except that he missed out details. If he had understood the fulfillment of the periods of the 70 years and the 140 years and so forth, that would have been a much stronger argument, but maybe too confusing for people. I don't know. But this is where we're at the present time. This movement has to accept this in the sense that our movement has accepted it as a valid argument. Jeff has accepted this. But if we accept this, what are we also accepting? Are we not accepting the basis for how we came to July 18th? And I always found it interesting that Parminder was always opposed to this. Not really openly. He would just say, I don't understand it. And I'm thinking like, well, you're a smart guy. This is not too difficult to understand. Seems to me pretty clear. And he would have these really bizarre sort of obtuse arguments that he would email me of why he couldn't understand it. That I could easily explain to him and show him Spirit of Prophecy statements and statements from the pioneers. But he just wasn't convinced. So you can see that if we reject July 18th, we also have to reject this. And so the question is it valid? You know, when we look back and we look at, you know, the 666 years, going back here, right, we've got all these different things. But when we look at Jehoiachin's captivity, I mean, it's really clear that he's captive for 36 years. And that from his captivity, there's 666 years to the destruction of Jerusalem, which follows 36 years after the close of probation for the Jews. Is this just a coincidence? Is it just a coincidence that Ezekiel, who gives us this period of counting from Jehoiachin's captivity, is predicting the destruction of Jerusalem in 586 on the 10th day of the 5th month, and that Jerusalem is destroyed, or the temple specifically, on the 10th day of the 5th month in 70 AD, in the 666th year of Jehoiachin's captivity? Is that just a coincidence?
Well, what I'm seeing here is the beauty of the structures, really. You know, the God that's behind this is the creator God that created the universe and all its beauty. And that beauty is reflected in what we're seeing here. The way the whole structure comes together is just phenomenal.
Right. And we also, I mean, I presented this to my guitar student, Luke, on Sabbath, and if lots of other things, probably too much. But what I was trying to show him is that, you know, the critics of the Bible, they would say, well, this book of the Bible must have been written after the fulfillment of the events that it talks about. You know, because we read about Cyrus, and it talks about, you know, I've named thee, surnamed thee, even though thou hast not known me, in Isaiah chapter 45, 44 and 45, where it talks about Cyrus, you know, open before him the two leaved gates, and the gate shall not be shut, right? All these things that are in Isaiah, which are written long before Cyrus is born. And yet what the critics of the Bible will say is that was added afterwards. So that didn't exist in the book of Isaiah. The book of Isaiah was written later, you know, long after these events. Well, the problem that we have there is that you can do that when you look at prophecy in its superficial sense, but you can't argue that Ezekiel, the book of Ezekiel, was written after the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. And so when you look at Jehoiachin's captivity and you see the structure, and you see that Leviticus 26 is being fulfilled in 597, that is the siege of Jerusalem by Babylon, and that Deuteronomy 28 is being fulfilled in 70 AD, the siege of Jerusalem by Rome, and that they're tied together with this 666 years, which is a symbol of the mystery cult that comes from Babylon, and that the papacy also has this number attached to it, and that William Miller also attached 666 years between pagan and papal Rome. You start to build too many layers that are to say that it's contrived, but that's what people will do. That is, they won't look at it openly and honestly. They can look at one of these things and kind of say, well, that's a coincidence. But you can't look at all of these structures and argue that this is all just coincidence. Now, there was one person in this movement who had left quite a while before, just sort of independently. And he said, even if Nashville happens, it's from Satan. And it's not, you guys predicted it. So this was before July 18th. You guys predicted based upon numerology and all these false ideas. And Satan is the one who's showing you these structures. So what would we argue to someone who says, well, Satan is the one who's showing you these things, that this is all the work of Satan to deceive you? What arguments would we have against that sort of criticism?
Well, Satan wouldn't have the power, I think, to predict such things.
Okay, he wouldn't have the power to predict them. He wouldn't have the power to control them.
But he also wouldn't have the interest to pointing us to periods like the end of the 2300 days and the way this sanctuary services and all that there sort of stuff. He would want us to keep us away from that, not lead us to it.
Okay, so if we make the argument that this is Satan, couldn't we use that whole argument against Christianity in general and Adventism in particular?
You might take it to the
Logical.
translation of the Bible.
Yeah, well, that would be the thing, is you would have to say that all of this, if you bring it to its logical conclusion, you then have no certainty that God is working at all, because you have nothing objective by which to measure whether something is true or not. Because you would apply it to the Bible. You would say, well, just because prophecies were fulfilled in the Bible, this is some kind of deception. You could also argue, even if you didn't believe in any sort of supernatural powers. I've had people make this argument. My son James is one of them. Basically, coincidences just happen. Like there's some kind of, he didn't say it this way, but basically some kind of law of the universe that you're just always going to see coincidences. And it's only your ability to see patterns that you notice these coincidences, but these coincidences aren't remarkable. They're just normal. But that's still really a problem. I do believe that there are things that are coincidences that happen. There's no doubt, and that people will be, they will take a coincidence and think it's remarkable when it isn't. That is, if you take all the people in the world and you look at the possibility of something happen and something seems to happen, it doesn't mean that it's anything more than a coincidence, because we do notice, we do have a bias towards what we see and ignore the things that we don't see. So people have all kinds of superstitions, like, for instance, the belief that full moons cause abnormal behavior and so forth. And the scientific evidence says there's no connection between full moons and any other kind of phenomenon of human behavior, statistically. But yet people will testify that, I worked at a psych ward and we always got way more people in on a full moon. But that is a bias of human perception. And so people could argue that that's what we see here. We're sort of picking and choosing. But the more that I've looked at this, the more I see that that's not possible. That we've looked at some things and looked at their mathematical probabilities that have nothing to do with human perception. When we looked at Josiah Litch's prophecy, when we looked at the 391 years, that it's this cycle, and it's so precise when we compared it to the 142,810 days in its preciseness compared to the 144,000 days, that it gave us this down to the minute preciseness, which is extremely remarkable fine tuning. So we can see the fine tuning argument that we have for the universe, the probability argument we have for the creation of man and the possibility that man could evolve. So we know that that can't happen mathematically. And we can apply it to this. So we can look at all of these prophetic periods and see that this is so unlikely. The only explanation is design. And that all of these things fit together. That is, I as a person could not have manufactured this, even if I had a powerful computer, to do kind of calculations and figure out when would I need all of these dates to line up so I could create these structures, because every date is not independent. They're all interlocked with each other. So if I moved one date, it would disrupt everything else. So all of these dates together are a witness. That is, they're not independent, they're interdependent. So, and some of these things that I found, they took time to dig into. They wouldn't have been understood by those that wrote these books, that wrote the books of the Bible. They could not have known these things. Okay, Iran, you have a comment?
I just think that Education 178 is relevant because it talks about the events and how they are under God's control.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so can you read it?
As the wheel-like complications were under the guidance of the hand beneath the wings of the cherubim, so the complicated play of human events is under divine control. Amidst the strife and tumult of nations, he that sitteth above the cherubim still guides the affairs of the earth.
Right. So Satan is not the one who guides these affairs. Right. So Satan couldn't be responsible for what we see, correct? That's your implication from that statement?
Yes.
Yeah. And the thing that I find, from a personal level, and I know other people have found that their events in their life, their major events, become parts of these structures. And when I mentioned these, at times there are people who would be very upset about it, as if I was, making myself to be a prophet or something. And I was quite clear that I expect that all of us should see God's hand in the events in our life, and that these have structure, and that they should be a part of the structure of the line that we're in. That God has woven our life into the fabric of time, of his hand, that all the events, not just of nations and kings, but the events of our life are guided by God's loving care. We should all know this. And to me, this is a real comfort to see that God doesn't just care about the big nations, but he cares about me as an individual. And so if we see ourselves in these lines, if we see the events of our lives, of the death of relatives or the birth of children, or our baptism, or our marriages, and we see that they fit into the structure of these lines in a way that's meaningful for us personally, we shouldn't be scared of that. We should be comforted by it. That God has a purpose and a plan for us.
It amazes me that they can say that God can count the hairs on your head and they can accept that. But when you come around and you point them to this and say, well, this is exactly the same thing,
Yeah.
they can't accept that. It's just an illogical idea to me.
Yeah. And now what it should do for us, I mean, one is it shows that God is in control. And right now, God wants to enter into covenant with us. He wants for us to see him in a way that we haven't seen him before, and to trust him in a way that we haven't trusted him before.
It brings me to the song, I Have an Anchor for My Soul
Mhm.
in the time of trouble. And this is our anchor for our soul. As we look at these things and contemplate what's happening and what we know is going to happen in the future, from just what everybody talks about, the Sunday laws coming and whatever, this gives us the anchor that settles us. That is our platform in which we're on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because we have to go through some pretty trying times. And for me personally, I don't trust my subjective feelings. I mean, because I know that people can deceive themselves. And I could deceive myself. So I need something, not because to trust in God, not because I don't trust in God, but because I don't trust in myself. I need something outside of myself, something objective, to know that God is actually leading me and speaking to me. And that's knowing his voice. And knowing his voice, knowing that it's contrary to our nature, and that the things that it shows us are not the things about others and how we're better than others, but our need of him. That's what all of this shows us. To me, this is extremely convicting. It's showing me God is in charge. And I'm just going to bring up, I guess I don't got that one there. That it's not dependent upon me in that sense. Where's our prophetic mirror? I guess I don't have it here. Just the Babylonian captivity. So we're going to look at a little bit more into Darius's decree, more detail of it tomorrow, and there may be more things about it that we haven't noticed before. And then we'll try to get through, at least this week, I want to get through Artaxerxes' decree. But Artaxerxes' decree, I want to look at it in a little bit more detail than I have in the past. I've touched sometimes on the problems that Adventists have with dating Artaxerxes' decree and the solutions that God has given this movement. And one of the things that I think is quite interesting, when we look at this period of 220 years, it's also symbolic of what? What is the 220 years symbolic of?
Restoration.
Okay, what else?
Well, we have the joining of the two sticks.
Okay, I mean numerically. What if I divide it by, I take it as days, and I divided it by 30? What would I have?
Aye.
I would have 7 months and 10 days, right?
Yes.
Atonement, yeah.
So 220 years is a symbol of the 10th day of the 7th month. And we know it's on the 10th day of the 7th month in 457 BC that the 2300 days and the 70 weeks commence. So when we begin to look at this in more detail, Darius's decree, we're even going to address a little bit more, once again, the story of Esther, just why Esther's in this line here, in that period between Darius and Artaxerxes, why that story is important. And then 457 BC itself. There are things that we're going to notice, that I've noticed, but also I'm pretty sure that there's going to be some details we never noticed, because there are some things we have to sort out about this. So anyway, thanks everyone for your participation. And let's close with a word of prayer. Dear Father in heaven, once again, we thank you for the time we have to study and for your hand, your providences in our lives, and the fact that you are in control of history, of the events that happen around us, that none of these things are at the will and the whim of man, but they are guided by your wisdom. And so we submit our lives to you. We ask that you can continue to teach us and help us to understand your word. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Yeah.